The doorbell chimed, shattering my peaceful morning like a hammer through glass. I knew who it was before I even reached the door. Only one person had the audacity to show up unannounced at 9 a.m. on a Tuesday. "Patricia," I said, forcing a smile as I opened the door. What a surprise. My mother-in-law breezed past me, her designer perfume leaving a cloying trail in her wake. "Evelyn, dear, I was in the neighborhood and thought I'd pop by to see how you're settling into your new role." The way she said role made it sound like a dirty word. I bit back a retort, reminding myself that I'd chosen this. I'd left my career to be a full-time housewife, to support Brian's growing business. It was my decision, even if Patricia couldn't fathom why anyone would make such a choice. "Coffee?" I offered, already moving towards the kitchen. "Oh, I suppose," Patricia said, her eyes scanning the living room with barely concealed judgment. "If you have time, I know how busy you must be, keeping house." I gritted my teeth as I prepared the coffee. When I returned, Patricia was running a finger along the mantelpiece, inspecting it for dust. "You know, Evelyn," she began, accepting the mug I offered, "I couldn't help but notice the state of Brian's shirts when he visited last week. Perhaps I could show you a better way to iron them?" "Brian's shirts are fine," I said, my voice tight. "He's never complained." Patricia clucked her tongue. "Oh, he wouldn't, would he? Such a good boy, always so considerate. But a wife should anticipate her husband's needs, don't you think?" I took a deep breath, counting to 10 in my head. "Patricia, I appreciate your concern, but Brian and I are doing just fine. We have our own way of doing things." "I'm sure you do," she said, her tone dripping with condescension. "I just worry, you see. It's such a big adjustment, going from a career woman to this." She gestured vaguely at the room. "This is my choice," I said firmly, "and Brian supports me." Patricia's eyes narrowed. "Does he? I wonder if he truly understands what he's given up. A wife who contributes financially, who has her own life outside the home. It's a lot to ask a man to shoulder all that responsibility." My hands clenched around my coffee mug. "Brian and I made this decision together. We're partners." "Of course, dear," Patricia said, patting my knee patronizingly. "I'm sure you believe that. Now why don't you show me what you've done with the guest room? I had some ideas about redecorating." I stood up abruptly. "Actually, Patricia, I have plans this morning. Perhaps we could do this another time?" She looked affronted. "Plans? What could be more important than family?" "I have a life outside of this house," I said, moving towards the door. "And right now, I need to get ready to live it." Patricia gathered her things, her lips pursed in disapproval. "Well, I can see I'm not wanted. I'll just have to tell Brian how inhospitable you were when he gets home." As soon as she was gone, I sagged against the closed door, exhaustion washing over me. That's when I noticed it. My journal, sitting on the side table, slightly askew from where I'd left it. With trembling hands, I picked it up, flipping to the most recent entry. There, in the margin, was a small pencil mark that hadn't been there before. My blood ran cold as realization dawned. Patricia had read my journal, my private thoughts about my struggles, adjusting to this new life, my fears and insecurities. She knew everything. In that moment, as anger and violation washed over me, I knew things would never be the same. Patricia had crossed a line, and I wasn't about to let her get away with it. This meant war. I stormed out of the house, my mind reeling from Patricia's invasion of privacy. The crisp morning air did little to cool my anger as I marched down the sidewalk, no destination in mind. That's when I heard a friendly voice call out, "Evelyn, what's got you in such a tizzy this fine morning?" I turned to see June, my elderly neighbor, tending to her rose bushes, her weathered face creased with concern as she took in my flustered state. "Oh, June," I sighed, feeling the fight drain out of me. "It's my mother-in-law. She's just impossible." June patted the bench beside her. "Come, sit. Tell old June all about it." I hesitated for a moment, then relented. As I settled next to her, the words tumbled out. Patricia's surprise visit, her condescending remarks, and the shocking discovery that she'd read my private journal. June listened intently, her eyes narrowing as I recounted the morning's events. When I finished, she let out a low whistle. "That woman's got some nerve," she said, shaking her head. "Reminds me of my own mother-in-law, God rest her soul. She was a real piece of work, too." "How did you handle it?" I asked, desperate for any advice. June chuckled. "Not well at first. But I learned something important over the years. You've got to set boundaries, and you've got to stick to them. Boundaries? The concept seemed foreign when it came to Patricia. Absolutely, June nodded firmly. You need to have a frank conversation with her. Let her know in no uncertain terms that her behavior is unacceptable. The thought of confronting Patricia made my stomach churn. I don't know if I can do that, June. She's Brian's mother, and I don't want to cause problems in the family. June's eyes softened. Honey, she's the one causing problems. You have every right to protect your home and your peace of mind. As we talked, I felt a weight lifting from my shoulders. June's wisdom, born from years of experience, gave me strength I didn't know I had. You know, June said, a mischievous glint in her eye, my Harold always said the best defense is a good offense. Maybe it's time you took the fight to Patricia. I raised an eyebrow. What do you mean? Well, June leaned in conspiratorially, you could always give her a taste of her own medicine, show up at her house unannounced, offer some unsolicited advice about her housekeeping. We both burst into laughter at the thought. As our giggles subsided, I felt a newfound resolve settling over me. You're right, June, I said, straightening my shoulders. I need to stand up for myself. I can't let Patricia walk all over me anymore. June squeezed my hand. That's the spirit, dear. Remember, you're not just standing up for yourself. You're standing up for your marriage, for your future family. As I walked home, buoyed by June's support, I began formulating a plan. I'd confront Patricia, set clear boundaries, and make it abundantly clear that her behavior wouldn't be tolerated any longer. But when I reached my front door, I froze. There, taped to the wood, was a note in Patricia's elegant script. Evelyn, I've taken the liberty of rearranging your linen closet. You'll find it's much more efficient now. We'll discuss your homemaking skills further at Sunday dinner. Patricia. My hands shook as I ripped the note from the door. How dare she enter my home without permission? Again. In that moment, all my carefully laid plans evaporated. This wasn't just about setting boundaries anymore. This was war. I stormed into the house, grabbed my phone, and dialed Brian's number. As it rang, I paced the living room, my free hand clenched into a fist. Hello? Brian's voice came through, tinged with concern. He must have sensed my mood even through the phone. Brian, I said, my voice trembling with barely contained fury, we need to talk about your mother, now. The tension in the room was palpable as I faced Patricia across the dining table. Brian sat beside me, his presence a comforting anchor in the storm that was about to break. Patricia, I began, my voice steadier than I felt, we need to talk about boundaries. Her eyebrows arched. Boundaries? I'm not sure I understand, dear. I took a deep breath. You've been overstepping, entering our home without permission, rearranging our things, and... I paused, steeling myself, reading my private journal. Patricia's face flushed, but she didn't deny it. I was only trying to help. As a mother, I have a right to ensure my son's home is well managed. No, you don't, Brian interjected, his voice firm. Mom, Evelyn and I are adults. We don't need your supervision. Patricia's eyes widened, shock evident on her face. Brian, surely you can't mean that. I've always had your best interests at heart. Your intentions don't justify your actions, I said. We're setting clear boundaries now. No more unannounced visits, no more helping without our permission, and absolutely no invading our privacy. Patricia's shock morphed into indignation. This is preposterous. I've done nothing but try to guide you both. Evelyn, you're the one causing a rift in this family with your modern notions and inability to keep a proper home. I felt Brian tense beside me, but I squeezed his hand, silently asking him to let me handle this. Patricia, this isn't about my homemaking skills or your guidance. It's about respect. We're asking you to respect our autonomy as a couple. For a moment, Patricia was silent, her eyes darting between Brian and me. Then her face hardened. I see. If that's how you feel, perhaps it's best if I limit my involvement in your lives. Mom, Brian started, but Patricia cut him off with a wave of her hand. No. I understand perfectly. You've made your choice clear. She stood, gathering her purse. But mark my words, Evelyn. This family needs stability, tradition. The only way you'll ever truly be part of it is if you give Brian a child, a son, preferably. Then maybe you'll understand the importance of family. Her words hit me like a slap. I stood up, anger coursing through me. How dare you? But Patricia was already heading for the door. She paused at the threshold, turning back with a vindictive smile. I'll be waiting for that announcement. Until then, enjoy your independence. The door slammed behind her, leaving a ringing silence in its wake. Brian wrapped his arms around me as I sagged against him. I'm so sorry, Evelyn. I had no idea she'd react like that. I shook my head, fighting back tears. It's not your fault. But Brian, what she said about having a child. He pulled back, looking into my eyes. Hey, don't let her get to you. We'll have children when we're ready, not because my mother demands it. I nodded, but Patricia's words had planted a seed of doubt. What if she was right? What if I could never truly be part of this family without producing an heir? As if reading my thoughts, Brian cupped my face in his hands. You are my family, Evelyn. You're all I need. I managed a weak smile, but inside, my mind was racing. Despite our victory in setting boundaries, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was far from over. Patricia's parting words echoed in my head, a sinister prophecy that threatened to overshadow our future. That night, as Brian slept peacefully beside me, I stared at the ceiling, my hand resting on my flat stomach. The thought that had been niggling at the back of my mind all evening finally crystallized into a startling realization. I was late, very late. My heart raced as I contemplated the possibility. Could I be pregnant? And if I was, how would this change things with Patricia? Would it bring peace to our family, or would it only give her more ammunition to interfere in our lives? As dawn broke, I made a decision. I would find out for sure, but I wouldn't tell Brian. Not yet. This was my secret to keep, at least until I figured out what it meant for our future. The pregnancy test trembled in my hands, 2 pink lines staring back at me. I was right. I was pregnant. A whirlwind of emotions swept through me. Joy, fear, excitement, and dread all tangled together in a complicated knot. I took a deep breath, steadying myself against the bathroom sink. This was what we wanted, wasn't it? A family of our own. But Patricia's words echoed in my mind, casting a shadow over what should have been a moment of pure happiness. When I told Brian that evening, his face lit up with unbridled joy. He swept me into his arms, spinning me around our kitchen. We're going to be parents, he exclaimed, his eyes shining with tears. I laughed, letting his excitement wash over me, pushing my worries aside for the moment. Yes, we are. As the weeks passed, my belly grew, and so did Patricia's interference. It started small, a book on proper prenatal care left on our doorstep, unsolicited advice about my diet slipped into conversation during Sunday dinners, but it quickly escalated. One afternoon, I came home to find Patricia in our nursery, directing a team of painters. What's going on here? I demanded, my hands instinctively cradling my swollen belly. Patricia turned, a serene smile on her face. Oh, Evelyn, I'm just helping you get the nursery ready. Blue is the perfect color for a boy's room, don't you think? I felt the blood drain from my face. We don't know the gender yet, Patricia, and even if we did, we didn't ask for your help. Her smile faltered. But surely you want a boy? To carry on the family name? We want a healthy baby, I said firmly. Boy or girl? Patricia's eyes narrowed. You're being naive, Evelyn. A son is what this family needs. Brian needs an heir. I opened my mouth to argue, but a sharp pain in my abdomen made me gasp. Patricia was at my side in an instant, her face a mask of concern. Are you all right? Should I call the doctor? I waved her off, taking deep breaths until the pain subsided. I'm fine, it's just stress. Patricia's expression softened. You see, this is why you need my help. You're clearly overwhelmed. I straightened up, fixing her with a hard stare. What I need is for you to respect our boundaries. Please leave, Patricia. Now. For a moment, I thought she might argue, but she simply pursed her lips and gathered her things. As she passed me, she paused. I'm only trying to help, Evelyn. One day, you'll understand. After she left, I sank onto the couch, my hands shaking. The stress of dealing with Patricia was taking its toll, and I knew it wasn't good for the baby. That night, I confided in Brian about my concerns. He listened, his face growing more troubled with each word. I had no idea it had gotten this bad, he said, running a hand through his hair. I'll talk to her, make her understand. No, I interrupted. I don't think that's enough anymore, Brian. Your mother, she's not going to change, and I can't keep dealing with this stress. It's not good for me or the baby. Brian took my hands in his. What are you saying? I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what I was about to propose. I think I should go stay with my mother for the rest of the pregnancy. His eyes widened in shock. Evelyn, no, this is our home, our family. We can't let my mother drive you away. It's not about letting her win, I explained. It's about doing what's best for our child. I need peace, Brian. I need to be able to enjoy this pregnancy without constantly looking over my shoulder. Brian was quiet for a long moment, his internal struggle visible on his face. Finally, he nodded slowly. If that's what you need, then that's what we'll do. But Evelyn, promise me this is temporary. Promise me you'll come back. I leaned in, pressing my forehead to his. I promise. This is our home, our family. I'm just taking a step back to protect it. As we sat there, holding each other, I felt a mix of relief and sadness wash over me. This wasn't how I imagined my pregnancy would be, but I knew in my heart it was the right decision. For now, at least, I would find sanctuary away from Patricia's overbearing presence. But a nagging voice in the back of my mind wondered, would this really solve our problems or just delay the inevitable confrontation? The gentle hum of my mother's sewing machine filled the quiet afternoon as I sat by the window, absently rubbing my swollen belly. It had been 3 weeks since I'd moved in with her, and the peace I'd found here was a balm to my frayed nerves. My phone buzzed, interrupting my reverie. Another message from Patricia. I hesitated before opening it, bracing myself for what I might find. Evelyn, how could you abandon your home like this? Brian needs you. Are you so selfish that you'd put your own comfort above your family's needs? I closed my eyes, taking a deep breath to calm the anger rising within me. This wasn't the first message of its kind, and I doubted it would be the last. Everything okay, honey? My mother asked, pausing her work. I forced a smile. Just Patricia again. Nothing I can't handle. But as the days passed, Patricia's messages became more frequent and more vicious. Each one chipped away at my resolve, planting seeds of doubt in my mind. A real wife would be by her husband's side. I always knew you weren't cut out for this family. That child deserves better than a mother who runs away from her responsibilities. One evening, as I sat on the porch swing, my phone buzzed again. This time it was Brian. Hey, love. How are you feeling? Mom's been asking about you. She seems pretty upset that you're not here. Maybe we should reconsider this arrangement. My heart sank. Even here, hundreds of miles away, Patricia's influence was seeping into our lives, manipulating Brian's thoughts. I was about to respond when another message from Patricia came through. This one was different. Attached was a photo of our nursery, completely redecorated in garish shades of blue and green. Since you're not here to prepare for my grandson, I took the liberty of doing it myself. I hope you appreciate all I'm doing for this family in your absence. Something inside me snapped. The constant barrage of guilt-tripping messages, the manipulation of Brian, and now this blatant disregard for our wishes. It was too much. With shaking hands, I pulled up Patricia's contact information. My finger hovered over the block button as a war raged within me. Was this too drastic? Would it cause irreparable damage to our family? But then I felt a strong kick from my baby, as if urging me on. In that moment, clarity washed over me. This wasn't just about me anymore. I had to protect my child from Patricia's toxic influence. I pressed block. A wave of relief washed over me, followed quickly by a pang of guilt. I dialed Brian's number, knowing I owed him an explanation. Evelyn, is everything okay? His voice was laced with concern. Brian, I just blocked your mother's number, I said, my voice trembling slightly. There was a long pause on the other end. Oh, he finally said. I see. I'm sorry, but I had to. The constant messages, the guilt-tripping, the redecorating of the nursery without our permission, it's too much. I need to focus on our baby now, not on managing your mother's feelings. I heard Brian sigh heavily. I understand. I'm sorry it came to this. I should have done more to shield you from her. It's not your fault, I assured him. But Brian, we need to talk about what happens after the baby is born. I won't bring our child into an environment where Patricia feels she can overstep our boundaries at will. You're right, Brian said, his voice firm. When you come home, things will be different. I promise. As we talked, making plans for our return and discussing how to handle Patricia going forward, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. For the first time in months, I felt truly hopeful about our future. That night, as I lay in bed, my hands resting protectively over my belly, I made a silent vow to my unborn child. No matter what challenges lay ahead, I would always put their well-being first. Patricia might be family by marriage, but this little one was flesh of my flesh, and I would move heaven and earth to give them the peaceful, loving home they deserved. The first cry of my newborn daughter filled the delivery room, and in that moment, all the pain and exhaustion melted away. I looked up at Brian, tears streaming down his face as he cut the umbilical cord. Our little Emily had arrived, perfect and beautiful. As I cradled her in my arms, a sense of peace washed over me. The struggles with Patricia seemed a distant memory. This was our new beginning. 3 days later, we were ready to go home. As Brian pulled into our driveway, I felt a mix of excitement and apprehension. Home, our sanctuary, but also the battleground where we'd faced so many conflicts with Patricia. "Ready?" Brian asked, squeezing my hand. I nodded, clutching Emily close to my chest as we walked to the front door. The moment we stepped inside, I knew something was wrong. The air felt different, stale somehow. "Brian," I whispered, "did you leave any windows open?" He shook his head, his brow furrowing as he looked around. That's when I noticed it, the empty spaces where my things used to be. My grandmother's antique vase gone from the mantel. The painting we'd bought on our honeymoon missing from the wall. "What the hell?" Brian muttered, moving quickly through the house. I followed him, my heart pounding. As we entered our bedroom, I gasped. My jewelry box was gone, along with the vintage dresser it had sat on. Even my clothes were missing from the closet. "This can't be happening," I said, my voice trembling. "We were robbed?" Brian's face had turned ashen. "No," he said quietly. "Look." He pointed to a note on the bed. With shaking hands, I picked it up, recognizing the elegant script immediately. "Evelyn and Brian, I've taken the liberty of clearing out some of the clutter in your home. You'll find it's much more suitable for raising a child now. I've sold the unnecessary items. Consider it a lesson in responsibility and prioritizing what truly matters in life. I look forward to meeting my grandchild. Love, Patricia." The paper crumpled in my fist as a wave of fury washed over me. She sold my things? She broke into our home and sold my possessions? Brian was already on the phone, pacing the room. "Mom, what have you done?" "No, you had no right. This is theft, Mom. Do you understand that?" As he argued with Patricia, I sank onto the bed, clutching Emily to my chest. She began to fuss, sensing my distress. I tried to soothe her, but my own emotions were spiraling out of control. This was supposed to be our homecoming, our fresh start. Instead, Patricia had violated our space, our trust in the most egregious way possible. Brian ended the call, his face a mask of anger and disbelief. "She says she did it for us, to teach us about responsibility. She won't tell me where she sold the items." I stood up, my body shaking with rage. "This ends now, Brian. I won't let her terrorize us anymore. I won't let her anywhere near Emily." "Evelyn." "No," I cut him off. "No more excuses, no more second chances. We need to confront her, face to face, and this time there will be consequences." Brian nodded slowly, his jaw set. "You're right, this has gone too far. We'll go to her house right now." As we prepared to leave, I looked down at Emily, peacefully asleep in her carrier. My resolve strengthened. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about protecting our daughter, our family. We drove to Patricia's house in tense silence. As we pulled up, I saw her peering out the window, a smug smile on her face. She thought she'd won, that we'd come crawling back, grateful for her interference. How wrong she was. I stepped out of the car, Emily in one arm, my other hand clenched in a fist. This was it, the moment of reckoning. As we approached the front door, I knew that whatever happened next would change our family forever. And I was ready for it. The door swung open, and there stood Patricia, her face a mask of false concern. "Oh, you're here. I was so worried when you didn't call. Come in, let me see my granddaughter." I clutched Emily tighter to my chest, my body tensing. "Not so fast, Patricia. We need to talk about what you've done." Her smile faltered for a moment before returning, brittle and forced. "What I've done? I've only been helping, dear. You'll see." "Helping?" Brian's voice was low and dangerous. "You call breaking into our home and selling our possessions helping?" Patricia's eyes widened in feigned innocence. "Breaking in? Don't be ridiculous, Brian. I have a key, and I was merely decluttering for the baby's sake." I felt my anger rising, threatening to boil over. "Those weren't your things to declutter, Patricia. You had no right." "I had every right." she snapped, her facade cracking. I'm family. I'm trying to teach you responsibility, to show you what really matters. You should be thanking me. Brian stepped forward, placing himself between Patricia and me. Mom, what you did was illegal. It was a violation of our privacy and our trust. We want our things back. Now. Patricia's face hardened. I'm afraid that's not possible. I've already sold most of it. The room seemed to spin around me. All those precious memories gone. I felt tears pricking at my eyes, but I blinked them back. I wouldn't give her the satisfaction of seeing me cry. Then you'll pay us back, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. Every penny. Patricia laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. With what money? Everything I had went into raising Brian, into supporting this family. You owe me, if anything. Brian's shoulders tensed. No, Mom, we don't owe you anything. Not anymore. The silence that followed was deafening. Patricia's eyes darted between us, realization slowly dawning on her face. What are you saying? She whispered. Brian took a deep breath. We're saying that this ends now. You're no longer welcome in our home. You're no longer a part of our lives. Patricia stumbled back as if she'd been struck. You can't mean that. I'm your mother. A mother respects boundaries, I said. A mother supports her children, not terrorizes them. You've shown us that you can't be trusted, Patricia. We won't let you hurt our family anymore. Tears welled up in Patricia's eyes, but I steeled myself against them. How many times had she used those tears to manipulate us? Brian, she pleaded, reaching for her son. You can't do this. I'm all alone. I need you. For a moment, I saw Brian waver. This was his mother, after all, the woman who had raised him. But then he looked at me, at Emily sleeping peacefully in my arms, and his resolve hardened. No, Mom, you need help, but not from us. Not anymore. We're leaving now, and I don't want you to contact us again. Patricia's face contorted with rage. You ungrateful children, after everything I've done for you. You'll regret this, mark my words. As we turned to leave, Patricia lunged forward, her hands outstretched towards Emily. If you're going to abandon me, at least let me hold my granddaughter one last time. I reacted instinctively, twisting away to shield Emily. In the process, I lost my balance, stumbling backwards. Time seemed to slow as I felt myself falling. Emily clutched tightly to my chest. Brian's strong arms caught me just before I hit the ground. Emily woke with a startled cry, and the sound seemed to snap Patricia out of her frenzy. She stood there, hands still outstretched, horror dawning on her face as she realized what she'd almost done. Get out, Brian growled, his voice trembling with barely contained fury. Get out now, or I swear I'll call the police. As we hurried to our car, Emily's cries piercing the night air, I looked back one last time. Patricia stood in the doorway, a small, broken figure silhouetted against the light. In that moment, I felt no triumph, no satisfaction, only a deep, aching sadness for what could have been, and the knowledge that our lives would never be the same again. 6 months passed without a word from Patricia. Brian and I focused on our new life with Emily, cherishing every moment of parenthood. The peace we'd found was healing, but the shadow of Patricia's actions still lingered. Then on a crisp autumn morning, a letter arrived. I recognized the handwriting immediately, my heart racing as I opened it. Dear Evelyn and Brian, I hope this letter finds you well. I'm writing to you from a place of deep reflection and regret. The past months have been difficult. I've lost my job, my home, and most importantly, my family. I realize now the gravity of my actions and the pain I've caused. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I know I don't deserve it. But I want you to know that I truly believed I was acting in your best interests. I see now how wrong I was. If you're willing, I'd like to meet, to apologize in person and to make amends, if possible. With love and remorse, Patricia. I showed the letter to Brian, watching his face as he read. What do you think? I asked softly. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. I don't know, Evelyn. Part of me wants to believe her, but after everything... I nodded, understanding his hesitation. Maybe we should meet her, hear her out at least. A week later we sat in a neutral coffee shop, Emily sleeping peacefully in her stroller. When Patricia walked in, I barely recognized her. Gone was the imperious woman who had terrorized our lives. In her place was someone who looked small, tired, and deeply sad. Thank you for agreeing to see me, she said, her voice trembling slightly as she sat down. Brian nodded stiffly. You said you wanted to apologize. Patricia took a deep breath. Yes, I I'm so sorry. For everything. I see now how my actions were not just misguided, but cruel and destructive. I was so caught up in my own ideas of what was best that I couldn't see the damage I was causing. She turned to me, tears in her eyes. Evelyn, I treated you abominably. I was jealous of your relationship with Brian, threatened by the changes in his life. Instead of supporting you both, I tried to control everything. I'm truly deeply sorry. I felt a lump forming in my throat. Patricia, you hurt us deeply. You violated our trust, our home, our privacy. How can we ever trust you again? She nodded, wiping away a tear. I know. I don't expect you to trust me. I don't even expect you to forgive me. I hope that maybe someday we can find a way to have some kind of relationship. For Emily's sake, if nothing else. Brian leaned forward, his face serious. Mom, we appreciate your apology, but you need to understand, things can never go back to how they were. If we decide to allow you back into our lives, it will be on our terms with clear boundaries that you must respect. Patricia nodded eagerly. Of course, anything. I've been seeing a therapist, trying to understand why I acted the way I did. I want to be better, for all of you. As we talked, I felt a weight lifting from my shoulders. The anger and resentment I'd been carrying began to dissipate, replaced by a cautious hope. We didn't forgive Patricia that day. Trust, once broken, takes time to rebuild. But we took the first steps towards healing. We agreed to occasional, supervised visits with Emily. Patricia would continue her therapy, and we would take things slowly, one day at a time. As we left the coffee shop, Brian squeezed my hand. Are you okay? He asked. I looked down at Emily, still sleeping peacefully, unaware of the complex emotions swirling around her. Then I looked at Brian, the man who had stood by me through it all. You know what? I think I am, I said, smiling. We've been through so much, but we've come out stronger. Whatever happens with your mother, I know we can handle it together. Brian pulled me close, kissing the top of my head. Together, he agreed. As we walked home, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but we had each other. We had our beautiful daughter, and we had the strength that comes from overcoming adversity together. In the end, that was all that mattered. We were a family, bound not just by blood, but by love, respect, and the shared experience of fighting for what truly matters. And no matter what challenges lay ahead, I knew we would face them united, stronger than ever before. The door slammed shut behind me, echoing through the empty hallway. I stood frozen, my heart pounding in my chest. Ethan's shoes were not the ones greeting me, but a pair I knew all too well. Vera's. Alara, what in the world do you think you're doing, coming home this late? Vera's voice sliced through the silence, sharp and accusing. I found my voice, though it trembled slightly. Vera, I didn't expect you to be here. It's not about me being here. It's about you neglecting your duties as a wife. Where have you been? Her eyes bore into me, seeking to unravel any excuse I might offer. I clutched the book about Miami tighter, feeling the weight of her judgment. This wasn't just about tonight. This was about every silent battle, every unspoken grievance that had built up over months. Ethan told me he wants a divorce, she continued, her words cutting deeper. I can't say I blame him. You're hardly the wife we hoped for. I felt a cold resolve settle over me. This was not just a confrontation. It was a declaration of war. My marriage, my life, was slipping through my fingers, controlled by a woman who saw me as nothing more than an inconvenience. I had always been the quiet one, the one who avoided conflict. But as Vera's words echoed in my mind, something within me snapped. No more. I wouldn't be the silent, suffering wife anymore. Vera, I work too, you know. I'm not just a housewife waiting for Ethan to come home, I said, my voice steady now. You work? That little office job? You think that's an excuse? You should be here, making this a home, not gallivanting around, she scoffed, her disdain palpable. Her words stung, but I stood my ground. I have every right to live my life, Vera. I'm not just an extension of Ethan. Her lips curled into a sneer. You're a disappointment, Alara. A real wife would put her husband and his family first. I took a deep breath, trying to calm the storm inside me. I won this trip to Miami, Vera. I was planning to give it to my parents, but now... Her eyes lit up with a mix of surprise and greed. Miami? Well, that changes things. Ethan and I could use a holiday. The audacity of her words hit me like a physical blow. It's not yours to take, Vera. I won it. It was for my parents. She stepped closer, her voice dripping with venom. "You're part of this family now, Alara. Your things are our things. And if Ethan wants to go to Miami with his mother, who are you to stop him?" I felt the anger rising in me, a burning flame fueled by months of her belittling and manipulation. "It's my prize, Vera. I decide what happens to it." Her laugh was cold and mocking. "We'll see about that, Alara. We'll see." She turned on her heel and left, leaving me standing alone, my heart racing with a mixture of fear and anger. I knew then that this was just the beginning. I had to fight back, not just for myself, but for the life I wanted, a life free from Vera's shadow. As I lay in bed that night, Ethan's snores a dull backdrop, my mind raced. Our marriage, once a hopeful union, now felt like a trap tightening around me with each passing day. The man beside me, once my partner, now seemed more like a stranger, a puppet dancing to his mother's tune. Morning came, and with it the usual routine. Ethan, always the early riser, was already at the breakfast table when I entered the kitchen. His eyes were glued to his phone, a frown creasing his forehead. "Good morning," I said, my voice neutral. He grunted in response, not looking up. I poured myself a cup of coffee, the silence between us heavy. Finally, he spoke, his eyes still on his phone. "Mom mentioned you want a trip to Miami." I nodded, bracing myself. "Yes, I was planning to give it to my parents." Ethan finally looked up, his expression a mix of annoyance and entitlement. "You should have discussed it with me first. Mom really wants to go." I clenched my fist, fighting the urge to lash out. "Ethan, it's my prize. I wanted to do something nice for my parents." He shrugged, dismissive. "Well, Mom's been feeling down lately, since Dad passed. This trip could really cheer her up." I could feel the anger bubbling inside me. "And what about my parents? Don't they deserve a break?" Ethan's eyes narrowed. "You're being selfish, Alara. Family comes first." "Your family, you mean," I shot back, my patience wearing thin. He stood up, his chair scraping against the floor. "You're my wife, Alara. That makes my family your family." The finality in his voice was a clear message. In his eyes, I was an accessory, an addition to his life, not a partner. I was to fall in line, to play the part he and Vera had scripted for me. The rest of the day passed in a blur. At work, I found myself distracted, the image of Ethan's indifferent face haunting me. I felt trapped, caught in a web woven by Vera and tightened by Ethan. That evening, I returned home to find Vera in my kitchen, cooking. The smell of her stew filled the air, a stark reminder of her constant presence in our lives. "Alara, there you are. I thought I'd make dinner tonight. You must be tired from work," she said, her voice dripping with false concern. I forced a smile, my stomach churning. "That's very thoughtful of you, Vera," she hummed, stirring the pot. "Ethan told me about the Miami trip. It's a shame you won't be joining us." The casualness of her words was like a slap in the face. "I haven't decided yet, Vera." She turned, her eyes cold. "Oh, but you have, dear. Ethan and I will be going. It's settled." The room felt small, suffocating. I wanted to scream, to shout, to reclaim my life from this woman who had insidiously crept into every corner. But I held my tongue, my resolve hardening. Vera and Ethan might think they had won this round, but I was far from defeated. I would find a way to turn the tables, to expose their selfishness and manipulation. As I sat at the dinner table that night, picking at the stew Vera had made, I knew one thing for sure. This wasn't just about a trip to Miami anymore. It was about taking back control, about fighting for my dignity, and I was ready for the battle. The following week was a tumultuous mix of silent dinners and whispered phone calls. Ethan had become increasingly distant, his allegiance clearly with Vera. The trip to Miami, my hard-won prize, now felt like a poisoned chalice. On a particularly dreary Thursday, I received a call from my mother. Her voice, usually so full of life, was tinged with disappointment. "Alara, dear, your father and I heard about the Miami trip. It's a shame we won't be going." Guilt gnawed at me. "I'm sorry, Mom. I really wanted you both to have it." She sighed. "It's all right, darling. We understand. Family must come first, as your husband says." The way she said family stung, a reminder of how Ethan and Vera had twisted the meaning of the word. That evening, as I entered the house, I found Ethan and Vera in the living room, poring over travel brochures. Their excitement was palpable, a stark contrast to the hollow feeling in my chest. "Alara, come look! We're planning our Miami trip," Ethan called out, his voice too cheerful. I approached reluctantly, The sight of them together like this, sending a wave of nausea through me. Vera looked up, her eyes gleaming. "We're thinking of staying at this lovely beachfront hotel. Isn't it wonderful?" I swallowed hard, forcing a smile. "It looks nice." Ethan glanced at me, then back at the brochure. "We should book soon. Don't want to miss out." Vera nodded in agreement, her smile widening. "Yes, let's. Alara, would you mind fetching us some tea?" The request, so casual yet so commanding, was the last straw. "Actually, I need to talk to you both about the trip." Their attention snapped to me, a flicker of wariness crossing Ethan's face. "The thing is," I began, my voice steady despite the pounding in my chest, "the trip to Miami was supposed to be a gift for my parents. I won it, and I should decide how it's used." Ethan's expression hardened. "Alara, we've been through this. Mom needs this trip." Vera chimed in, her tone patronizing. "Dear, it's just a trip. Your parents will understand." Frustration boiled inside me. "No, you don't understand. This was something special for my parents. You can't just take it away." Ethan stood up, his demeanor shifting from cheerful to menacing. "You're being selfish and unreasonable, Alara. This is family we're talking about." "I am talking about my family." I shot back, my voice rising. Vera tutted, shaking her head. "Ethan, see what I mean? She's not family-oriented, not like us." I looked between them, my heart racing. "You know what? Take the trip, but this is not over." Turning on my heel, I stormed out of the room, their triumphant smirks burning in my memory. As I headed to our bedroom, a plan began to form in my mind. They wanted to play dirty? Well, two could play at that game. This trip to Miami would be a trip they'd never forget. A trip where karma would come calling, and I would be the one to deliver it. I spent the next few days in a state of cold fury, my mind racing with plans for revenge. Ethan and Vera, ensconced in their bubble of self-righteousness, seemed oblivious to the storm brewing. On Saturday morning, as I sipped my coffee, Ethan slid a brochure across the kitchen table. "We've booked the hotel in Miami. It's going to be fantastic." I looked at the glossy pictures of sun-kissed beaches and luxury suites, a bitter taste in my mouth. "I'm sure you'll enjoy it," I said flatly. Ethan frowned, picking up on my tone. "What's your problem, Alara? You should be happy for us." I stared at him, incredulous. "Happy? You're taking a trip meant for my parents, and you want me to be happy?" He leaned back, his expression one of exasperation. "You're making a big deal out of nothing. It's just a trip." "Just a trip?" I echoed, my voice rising. "It was a gesture for my parents, Ethan, something special for them. And you and your mother just bulldozed over it." Ethan's patience snapped. "Enough, Alara. You're acting like a child. You need to start thinking about what's best for this family." The word family echoed in my ears, twisted and corrupted by his and Vera's selfishness. "And what about what's best for me? For my family?" I countered. Ethan stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. "You're my wife, Alara. Your place is here with me and my mother. If you can't accept that, maybe we shouldn't be married." His words hung in the air, a threat and a challenge all at once. For a moment I felt a pang of fear, of uncertainty, but then a wave of clarity washed over me. "Maybe you're right, Ethan," I said quietly, my decision made. "Maybe we shouldn't." His eyes widened, taken aback by my response. "What are you saying?" I met his gaze, my resolve steeling. "I'm saying that this marriage, this life, it's not what I want, not with you and Vera controlling every aspect of it." Ethan's face contorted with anger. "You'll regret this, Alara. You think you can just walk away? From me, from this family?" I stood, facing him squarely. "I'm not walking away, Ethan. I'm taking back my life." He snorted, dismissive. "We'll see how long you last without us." I turned away, my mind racing with plans and possibilities. The stage was set, the players in place. It was time for my revenge to unfold. As I packed a small bag, my thoughts were clear and focused. Ethan and Vera had pushed me to the edge, and now they would see just how far I was willing to go. This was no longer just about a trip to Miami. This was about reclaiming my dignity, my independence, and showing them that I was not to be underestimated. I left the house without a backward glance, the door closing behind me with a finality that felt like freedom. I moved back to my parents' house, each step feeling like a weight lifting off my shoulders. My parents, though surprised, supported my decision. In the sanctuary of my old room, I plotted my next move. A few days later, Ethan called. "Alara, where are you? We need to talk about the Miami trip." I'm at my parents', I replied, my voice steady. And there's nothing to talk about. You've made your decision. He was silent for a moment. You can't just run away from this. We're married. Not for much longer, I said quietly. I'm filing for divorce, Ethan. There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end. Divorce? You can't be serious. I've never been more serious, I affirmed. Our marriage is over, Ethan. He sputtered in disbelief. You'll regret this. You think you can just leave me and get away with it? I smiled, a sense of empowerment surging through me. I'm not getting away with anything. I'm taking back my life. Ethan's voice turned cold. We'll see about that. And the Miami trip? You're ruining everything. I chuckled softly. Oh, Ethan, you have no idea. Enjoy your trip. The line went dead, and I sat back, a plan forming in my mind. Ethan and Vera thought they had won, but the game had just begun. The next day I called the airline. I need to make a change to the reservation for the Miami trip. The agent was accommodating. Of course, Miss Alara, what changes would you like to make? I won't be going, I said. The tickets are non-transferable, correct? That's right, the agent confirmed. Good, I said, a smile playing on my lips. Keep it that way. The day of their departure arrived, and I couldn't help but feel a twinge of anticipation. Ethan and Vera, unaware of the surprise awaiting them at the airport, were in for a rude awakening. I received a call from Ethan later that day, his voice frantic. Alara, what the hell did you do? They won't let us board. The tickets are void without you. I feigned innocence. Really? That's strange. I guess you should have read the fine print, Ethan. You did this on purpose, he accused. I shrugged, even though he couldn't see me. You took something that wasn't yours, Ethan. Actions have consequences. His voice was a mix of anger and desperation. This isn't over, Alara. You'll pay for this. I hung up, a sense of satisfaction washing over me. This was just the beginning of their downfall. Ethan and Vera had underestimated me, but they were about to learn just how costly that mistake was. As I sat back, a plan unfolding in my mind, I knew one thing for sure. Revenge was a dish best served cold, and I had just started cooking. After thwarting Ethan and Vera's Miami plans, I felt a sense of control returning to my life. But my thirst for justice was far from quenched. The real act of retribution was about to begin. A week passed, and I received a call from Ethan. His tone was a mix of anger and desperation. Alara, we need to talk. I'm coming over. I agreed, curiosity piqued. When he arrived, he was a shadow of his usual arrogant self. Alara, I'm in trouble, he began, his eyes avoiding mine. I raised an eyebrow. What kind of trouble? He hesitated before confessing. At work. They've started an investigation. They think I've been embezzling funds. I suppressed a smile. Embezzling? That's serious, Ethan. He ran a hand through his hair, visibly stressed. It's not just that. They're questioning my absences, my trips with Mom. They think it's all connected. I leaned back, the pieces falling into place. Sounds like you've made quite a mess. He looked up, desperation in his eyes. Alara, I need your help. You have to vouch for me. Tell them I was with you. I laughed, the sound bitter. Why would I do that, Ethan, after everything? He reached for my hand, but I pulled away. Please, Alara, I'm begging you. If I lose this job, I'm ruined. I stared at him, the man who had once been my world, now reduced to a groveling mess. You should have thought about that before, Ethan. You made your bed. Now lie in it. As he left, his shoulders slumped. I knew the wheels of karma were turning. The following day, news of Ethan's dismissal and his embezzlement spread. Vera, once so proud and haughty, became the subject of whispers and judgmental glances in the neighborhood. Their fall from grace was swift and merciless. Ethan tried to reach out again, but I was done. My lawyer handled the divorce proceedings, ensuring I was well protected and compensated. As for Ethan, he was left to face the consequences of his actions alone. I visited my parents, sharing the news. It's over, I told them. The divorce is final. My mother hugged me, tears in her eyes. You're strong, Alara. Stronger than you know. I nodded, a sense of peace settling over me. I had to be, Mom, for myself. In the end, Ethan and Vera reaped what they had sown. Their deceit and selfishness had been their undoing. As for me, I was free from their toxic grip, ready to start anew. The scars of the past would always be there, but they were a reminder of the battles I had faced and won. I was no longer the meek, compliant wife. I was Alara, a woman who had stood up for herself and emerged stronger. The day after my divorce was finalized marked the beginning of a new chapter in my life. The shackles of my oppressive marriage were finally broken, and I could breathe again. Sitting in my parents' garden, I reflected on the journey that had led me here. The pain, the betrayal, and ultimately, the triumph over those who sought to control me. My mother joined me with 2 cups of tea. "What will you do now, Alara?" she asked gently. I took a sip, feeling the warmth spread through me. "I'm going to live, Mom, for myself this time." She smiled, a look of pride in her eyes. "You've grown so much, darling." Our conversation was interrupted by a knock at the door. My father answered it, his voice rising in surprise. "Ethan, what are you doing here?" I stood, my heart pounding. Ethan stood at the door, a shadow of his former self. "Alara, I need to talk to you." I walked over, my resolve firm. "There's nothing left to say, Ethan." He looked desperate, his eyes pleading. "Please, Alara, I've lost everything. My job, my reputation. Even Mom won't talk to me. I need your help." I shook my head, incredulous. "You expect me to help you? After everything you've done?" He reached out, but I stepped back. "I'm sorry, Alara, I was wrong. Please give me another chance." Then I looked at him, seeing the man I once loved now broken and humbled. "It's too late, Ethan. You made your choices, and now you have to live with them." He slumped, defeated. "I understand. I'm sorry, Alara. Truly." As he walked away, I felt a sense of closure. Ethan's downfall was his own doing. He had underestimated me and paid the price. Turning back to my parents, I smiled. "I think it's time for a new adventure." Weeks later, I found myself on a plane to Miami, the trip I had won all those months ago. This time it was on my terms. My parents sat beside me, their excitement contagious. As the plane soared above the clouds, I looked out the window, a sense of freedom washing over me. I had faced my battles and emerged victorious. Now it was time to enjoy the peace that came after the storm. Miami awaited, a symbol of my newfound independence and strength. I was ready to embrace whatever came next, to live a life filled with joy on my terms. Ethan and Vera were part of my past, a chapter closed and left behind. Ahead lay endless possibilities, a future where I was the author of my own story, and I was determined to make it a beautiful one.